common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And joining us now to talk more about this is Professor Alan Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz, what is your reaction to the fact that Bragg, as you just heard from Judge Weinberg, is saying, you know what? We'll just kind of continue this. He's not dismissing the case. He is saying a delay, but he's saying maybe after he gets out of the White House. The people have spoken, Professor Dershowitz.
Well, I predicted this exactly. I predicted it on my podcast. I said he's going to try to postpone the sentence 4 years so that Trump can't appeal. That's the gambit. The gambit is Trump can't appeal unless there is a sentence. And that way he avoids being reversed for 4 years. Now, if I'm Trump's lawyers, and I certainly will communicate with Trump's lawyers about this, immediate mandamus to the appellate division saying, forget about sentencing. If he doesn't want to sentence us, fine. But we have the right to appeal now. And he ought to take the appeal immediately. And if he loses in the appellate division, which he probably will, take it to the New York Court of Appeals and then to the Supreme Court. But he has the right to an immediate appeal, and Bragg is trying to avoid being reversed. And because he knows he's going to be reversed on appeal, so he's trying to avoid that for 4 years.
And Mershon understands that too, Alan.
Of course Mershon understands that. And it's utterly unethical. It's a way of circumventing the appellate process. A lot of people don't realize that you can't appeal a case, even if you have a jury verdict against you, until the sentencing. The judgment is the sentence. And that's why both Bragg, and I don't know if Marchand will go along with it, probably he will, but we can't be sure, is the attempt to try to circumvent and game the process and avoid Trump's ability to appeal. Because if he appeals, he's going to win.
You know what's so just shocking as a layperson? I'm the only non-attorney here. But as I'm sitting here looking at this, Professor Dershowitz, this to me just reeks of politics. I mean, why would Bragg continue to hang this over? I mean, you're looking at all these other cases are clearly falling apart, dismissed. They had the Supreme Court decision on immunity, and yet he is continuing it. This to me looks so transparent.
It's the only conviction so far, the only jury verdict, and he wants that to hang over the head. Number one. Number two, he's running for re-election. So far, he's not being primaried. He ought to be primaried. So far, he's not being primaried. But if he is, then he's going to be able to say, I got a conviction. If he gets reversed before the election, it will be terrible for his electoral chances. So it's political in so many different ways. It's political against Trump. It's political in favor of Bragg. And it's also political in favor of Marchand. It's the perfect way out. The only problem is it's unlawful, unconstitutional, unethical, and improper.
Governor Pataki.
Well, I think, Professor, from the beginning, this indictment, let alone the conviction, was of a crime that doesn't exist, and it was just made up for political reasons. And if Marchand had any sense of fairness at all, which I doubt if he does, he would dismiss it in the interest of justice and just have this finally go away. But we had a corrupt prosecutor creating a bogus case where there was no crime, and then a judge tilting the balance so heavily that it was impossible to actually have a fair trial.
And now we have a corrupt process whereby
an entirely
the right to appeal. Yeah.
An entirely corrupt process. And one of the first of all, it's awful for our political process and for President Trump, but it also sends the message to people that New York is no longer a place where you can even count on the courts. And New York always had some difficult politics, but at least you could count on the courts. And unless Marchand does something that's out of the character that they've shown in the past and dismiss it in the interest of justice and just have this go away as it should have never started, we're going to have people take a look and say, I'm not so sure I can rely on the New York judicial system.
They think that already, don't you think?
The only place we disagree with is when I was growing up in Brooklyn in the 1950s. It was well known in my neighborhood. It cost you, I think it was $15,000 for a Supreme Court judgeship, contributed to the Democratic Party people, the Tammanies of Brooklyn. I think it was $45,000 or $40,000 for an appellate court judge. You know, they were for sale. I'm not saying unqualified people got it. Qualified people
You're saying they got a little cashola.
Well, no, all they were doing was making contributions.
Oh, yes, yeah. Totally ethical. Totally ethical.
But you know what one of the congressmen was doing? I knew this congressman from Brooklyn. He had two offices. He had his congressional office. This is Emanuel Seller. There's no reason to protect him. He had a congressional office, and right next door was his law office. And if you wanted to bribe him, you just hired his law firm, and you paid them a $10,000, $20,000 retainer for doing whatever they did, and then somehow you'd get a special bill passed in Congress. Corruption was rampant in Brooklyn back in the 50s when I was a kid and involved in Democratic politics.
Oh, wait, Governor Pataki has something on that.
You were a Democrat back then, Alan. What is this saying? I'm kind of concerned about you.
Everybody was a Democrat. In Brooklyn, the way you rank parties, Democrat first, Liberal Party second, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, Republicans were after the Communist Party. There were no Republicans in Brooklyn back in the day. Of course, everybody knew that to have any control or any influence, you had to be a Democrat.
Judge Weinberg.
Alan, I want to ask you a different topic. I want to ask you about this gambit that Trump is pushing for recess appointments. What are your thoughts on that?
Unconstitutional.
Exactly.
Clearly. Recess appointments were intended to make sure that members of the Senate and the Congress who had to go by horse and buggy from Kentucky up to Washington, D.C., didn't leave important government offices like the defense, Army, Treasury, State vacant. It was not intended as a way of circumventing senatorial approval. So I think it'll be struck down. There are already 4 justices in a prior opinion in 2014, I think, who raised questions about recess appointments. And certainly if the purpose of the recess appointment is to avoid congressional scrutiny of people like Getz, I think you'll get a majority of the Supreme Court to strike that down.
And, of course, that's what he's trying to do with these administration appointments. We'll see where this goes. It's really getting interesting.
Great appointments, too. He's made some great appointments.
Absolutely.
He should get credit for that. I think some of his
Getz is not one of them.
Absolutely right. And he's already hinted that Getz probably won't make it. Maybe he's the sacrificial lamb. The Senate will say no to Getz, and maybe they'll say yes to all the rest of them.
Maybe he did it to put fear in, all the people in Tammany Hall and elsewhere that you talked about.
There's another theory, too, and that is Getz wanted a neat exit out of Congress to end the congressional probe, and this gives him a plausible way of getting out of Congress and getting an end to the probe about his ethical conduct.
Yeah, although now it's starting to leak out a little bit. Some of the, Professor Dershowitz, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Love having you here.